It was a pretty full-on job, and normally you command a squadron for 2.5 years. In my case, I did it for virtually 3 years because we were doing this night trial on the squadron. So we were doing the introduction of night flying that covered 2 night winters. So we did 92, 93 and then 93, 94. And I should have left the squadron before the second night winter, but it was not the right time to hand over because I'd got all the experience from that first night season, and my successor coming in would not have had the benefit of having had that experience. And of course that's hard-won experience, getting out there with the goggles and the FLIR and all that sort of thing, and we were basically teaching ourselves to be night attack pilots. So I stayed on the squadron, I volunteered to stay on. I said to the station commander it only makes sense for me to stay on the squadron, and which I did, and so I did virtually 3 years in command of the squadron and saw it through to the end of the second night season, which was the end of our trial period, to make sure that it was suitable to introduce night operations to the whole Harrier front line. And sure enough, the next winter it was rolled out into RAF Germany.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. You talked about introducing the FLIR and the goggles.
Yep.
You'd think that would be done by test pilots or maybe by BAE Systems. Why is it done on a squadron?
No, it was all done by those people.
Oh,
so,
right.
so down at Boscombe Down, there was a unit called the Strike Attack Operational Evaluation Unit, which would trial all the kit and look into the operations. Okay, so they'd done the groundwork, but not at squadron level. So they looked at the feasibility of what we were setting out to do with the Harrier GR7. And it was a good friend of mine, Keith Grumbly, was commanding the Strike Attack Operational Evaluation Unit during that time leading up to this. And he and the guys have been flying around with this kit, just looking at it. And then we just took off from where they left off. So our job was to introduce it into squadron service.
And obviously very successfully as well.
Well, yes, but that's a credit to the whole squadron. Yes. And in fact, one of my flight commanders, Mike Harwood, had been serving with the Strike Attack Operational Evaluation Unit. So I grabbed him and brought him into the squadron because at least we then had one man who actually knew something about this kit. So he was responsible effectively for running our night operation program, but ultimately I was responsible because I was the boss of the squadron. So if it all went wrong, I was the guy that would carry the can. So Mike evolved a training program for us. We had, I haven't gone into the detail, but we had a limited number of aircraft available to us when we started the night operations. So I appointed myself and my qualified weapons instructor, a very capable guy called Rob Adlam, as my number 2, and the 2 of us went through at the forefront of the night introduction. And then we had the other guys followed on very closely behind, but it was a sort of staged process. We couldn't just suddenly convert everybody into night operations, so we had to do a few people at a time. So Rob and myself went through, with Mike keeping an eye on us, and ultimately it was my decision as to what I thought was safe to do and what we thought wasn't safe to do. And we basically taught ourselves a few lessons, and that we're not going to do that again, and so on. So.
Brilliant. Was the Falcon 20 the right aircraft for this mission?
Of the aircraft available, it was the right aircraft. That's what I'd say. There were a number of shortcomings with the aircraft, there's no doubt about that. We had a limited ceiling, limited top speed, limited manoeuvring capability in terms of the amount of G you could pull. So yes, it certainly had its limitations. As I say, we were limited on the amount of time we could do on task, depending on where you were operating, for instance. But it was good for what we were doing with it. It's still in service at the moment, doing the same thing, but providing you accepted its limitations. I mean, the attack packages that we went out with, they would be operating in the cruise probably at 420, 450 knots, something like that in the cruise, and then accelerating into the target area or whatever. Our maximum speed at low level was 350 knots, okay? And we wouldn't want to be cruising at that because we'd be burning the fuel very quickly. So we'd really be more looking at 280, 300 knots. So yes, there are a number of, a number of limitations with the airframe, but for what was available at the time, it was a good aircraft.